Hey there, you've tuned into another segment of our Social Causes Fridays. I'm that girl, Jenna Karasoa. It's June 24th, 2022, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going through our book series, Drugs and the Making of the Modern World. We're going through the little three, which is Opium, Cannabis, and Coca. So looking forward to it. As always, I apologize in advance if I waste your time, but at any point in time you're consuming this content, I can genuinely only hope you're doing well. So with that, let's just jump straight into this is going to be pretty extensive. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. There's so much information packed on information, so I will do my best to make this as fluid and comprehensive as possible. Again, we're going through, the book is called Forces of Habit, Drugs and the Making of the Modern World by David T. Courtwright. I'm just giving some highlights, some crib notes, some of my personal things that I find interesting or fascinating that I consider that you guys might like as well. So I highly recommend, as always, that you get the actual book though, because it is full of so much information. It's packed with history. And let me go ahead and just, yep, this is how it looks right here, the cover. It's very, very thick and very small print, a lot of information. So again, with what I have here on the blog post, the notes, very, very shorthand. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for anyone who's tuned in. Okay, so with segment one, let's talk about the first one, which is opium. And personally, this one is fascinating. All of it's very, very fascinating. So opium origins. So it starts from the poppy, and they're grown all over, from China to Europe. And around 1600 BC, the Neolithic people of Switzerland, they are the ones that they kind of assume originate, or the ones that they discovered, that they assume discovered it, but it's probably been around longer than that. So poppy juice, opium means poppy juice in Greek, and the value found is the nutrition, seeds, oils, medicinal and psychoactive effects. And it was spread through Greece, Crete, Egypt. Very, very popular. Again, around 1600 BC is the earliest documentation that they have of it. So they use it for varying things. It was great to treat anxiety, boredom, and of course if you had like diarrheal issues, also malaria fevers, been notated to be very, very helpful and effective with that. So it's also notated that Roman Emperor, I don't know if you're familiar with him, Marcus Aurelius, he used opium to sleep, and historians have notated, also very, very interesting, that he would wall himself off emotionally from the world that he famously despised. And interestingly enough, it was pretty prominent in the Arab countries, probably because they didn't drink alcohol in the Islamic religion, so opium was a better alternative, and also very, very popular for medicinal purposes, also medically imperative for victims of diarrheal complications, and then, like I mentioned before, the malaria fevers. So Sir William Moore, he's a British physician. He was sent out there to figure out why in the East specifically there was such a high rate of this particular drug use. And it was easy initially to accuse him of being racist, but he just really figured that he observed that in hot climates and tropics, on page 33 it says, eliminates distress to relieve the body from the effects of the scorching heat and to induce deeper sleep. And there was other things he listed too. Again, these are just quick little notations. But Chinese opium, yes, that was an offshoot of smoking of tobacco. And around 1760, that's when they learned how to make pure opium, and they smoked that. But by the 1900s in China, it was very, very common that peasants were utilizing it. So at first it was for the rich, and then it transitioned to the common layman peasants. So very, very popular amongst all demographic groups. And then a gentleman by the name of Warren, where is it at? Delano II. He's the grandfather of FDR, interestingly enough, and also in charge of Russell and Company. So, page 34, he's, again, be paraphrasing a quote from him saying, as a merchant, I insist that it has been a fair, honorable, and legitimate trade. So unfortunately, there were some issues going on with the commerce behind this drug. And so in the Chinese eyes, he's considered, and men like him were considered as the enemy. And as they try to, have a little bit more suppression, because technically, it was supposed to be, where is it at in my notes? It's patently illegal since 1729 due to some type of imperial edict. So when they started to enforce some of these things, they got a little bit mad over in China. So the first war over opium was about 1839 to 1842, and yeah, did not end well for the Chinese. I'm not going to go into the details with that. But then the second Anglo-Chinese War took place in 1856 for about 2 years, and that resulted in the legalization of the Indian opium trade. So, still very, very serious about their opium. It's very fascinating how many wars and how much, I don't want to say violence that comes from it, but that seems to be what's kind of happened with these controlled substances. This is kind of why we're having the discussions. We're discovering the history of vice and what the average man will do to obtain their controlled substances. But interestingly enough, there was a lot of immigration, so about 2 million of the Chinese went to different countries and continents. California, interestingly enough, one of the places they went to Australia, Philippines, Sumatra, Indochina, and they took opium with them. So a lot of the Chinese opened up their own little places, and they attracted, and quoted on page 34, lonely, oppressed, indebted individuals. They sought releases in constellation of bachelor vices, which included gambling, prostitution, and opium smoking. But talented people such as Oscar Wilde and Charles Dickens actually utilized it, and the use and addiction increased rapidly in the United States. So it did catch on, and the addiction and problems started to arise despite, we'll go into it to see what people attempted to do to kind of like restrict it. But the use and addiction increased in the United States. It doubled between 1870 and 1890. And there's a quote that says by a journalist, "If there were a possible way to stop the sale of opiates today," interesting, in a week's time there would be a raving maniacs of people dropping dead on every corner of the town and cities. So interestingly enough, though, causes of the increase was due to the Civil War. And part of that was Saint morphine. So there was a patent of medicine, hypodermic injections, and then morphine, which was the psychoactive alkaloid of opium. Interestingly enough. So a German pharmacist, Friedrich Turner, cannot pronounce that, I apologize. He worked on the isolation of morphine. So it was kind of imperative. It was a godsend during the war because, it was a great pain reliever. So, opium by itself was the most adulterated drug. It was utilized different things, but they were mixing it with different stuff. So, on the other hand, you've got morphine, which was a lot more, the technique was perfected. It was made pure, and it was predictable, but the consequences were that it led to greater addiction. So, yes, it was consistent, you knew what you were getting, you could inject it, it was fast response, but then also the downside was more addiction. In 1886, a gentleman named by Jules Verne wrote a sonnet, "Oh, jab me with your fine needle 100 times, and 100 times I will bless thee, Saint Morphine." And that was due to being relieved of pain from a gunshot injury. So it was pretty new to have the benefits of morphine to relieve pain, to the point where someone's going to write poetry towards it. And in 1926, poppy fields grew in Sonora, northwestern Mexico. And historian Alfred McCoy, he cites different reasons why addicts, there was a mass addiction, and especially with heroin. So one of the reasons, or some of the reasons cited for the mass addiction problem, was unemployment, alienation, and then just essentially youth, the young drug culture. So an exclusive emphasis on addicts' motives, ignores the fundamental fact that heroin is a mass market commodity. Without global production and distribution, there can be no mass addiction to cocaine or heroin. So definitely global production, the industry in itself made it possible for the addiction to take off. So with that, that's your first segment of opium, and originated from the poppy seed. It's very, very interesting, and let us continue on to the next segment though. Lots of good information here, and so this one's going to be really, really fun. Alright, so for our next segment is good old-fashioned cannabis, which with the author who's a history teacher, or he teaches, or professor, not just teacher, a professor. It's a little bit more than just being a teacher, but essentially he's a teacher. So, but from the book, it's according to this research, cannabis originated in Central Asia and extensively cultivated in China about 6,000 years ago. And it's a valuable multi-use crop, and it's been used for obviously a drug, but cooking oil, the seeds, edible seeds, animal fodder, and then also the great fibers and ropes, different things from the hemp. And it flourished in different climates, just being able to grow in different places. It's most prized country of India for psychoactive plants. So the first variation that they have of this is called Bhang, Bhang, and it's dried cannabis leaves, seeds, and stems, and it's the earliest reference that they have documented of this concoction is 2000 to 1400 BC. The next one is ganja, and that's made from the dry flowering tops and cultivated female plants, 3 times stronger, and it's usually smoked and ingested. And then the last one is the charas, pure resin processed from plants. And no one's quite sure when cannabis entered Europe, but it was highly controversial there, as well as in the Arab countries, which due to Islamic faith. But the Arabs did. There was attempts to stop the production or the growth of it, but the Arabs took it along the east coast of Africa. So they continue to spread it and trade it and share it. So very awesome. Spanish cultivated in the early 19th century and briefly in California. So they used imported slaves and that were working on the sugar plantations in Brazil, and they were permitted to smoke it. And quoted in page 41, it says, "And to smoke and dream during periods of inactivity between harvests." A gentleman by the name of Vera Rubin, an anthropologist, used the term the ganja complex. So, which is pretty much a pattern of cannabis use, the different uses between clothing, spice, an energizer, a medicine. And again, in Brazil, it was known as the opium for the poor. So, very, very interesting perspective. And 1838, the sugar plantations, they hired indentured workers from India when there was a decline of slavery, and they encountered the ganja complex that came with the workers. By 1970, 60% of Jamaican and rural males smoked it. Page 42, the folk medicinal use of cannabis teas, so widespread, but even devout Christians did not regard it as a vicious or délicatessen. So, it seemed pretty, neutral, mixed opinions. I don't know, cannabis is definitely, to this day, has very, very mixed opinions. But again, just going through the history from this one book, seeing what they said. 1916, the first report of American troops smoking cannabis, and by 1932, they discovered that Panamanian farmers growing and selling the surplus to Americans. So they started doing investigations, and they notated on page 42, the plant is used to make tea. There is among the colored people great faith in the efficacy of the strength as a mild stimulant, feeling of well-being, and also preventative of malaria. So these are some of the Army officials notating people's use, their enlisted members' use of cannabis. So cannabis smoking from U.S. from Mexican laborers raised commercially for fiber and seed. And then a quote on page 43, it says, "I'd rather have weed, but it do me better than whiskey do." And interestingly enough, in Tennessee, convict laborers simply dried and smoked flowery tops widespread. Availability kept the price low. Interesting too, World War II Army psychiatrists studied morale and discipline, and there was an incident, or not an incident, but a case study from a 26-year-old black service member, and he notes, this is what the gentleman says: you like to look at freaky things, you like to go to one of those freaky pads where you can look at the nude bodies. And there is more that was quoted on here, but just to highlight. And it says, the diagnosis of drug addict Section 8 category for men of unsuitable and unadaptable habits on traits of character. So one of the downsides of the psychoactive is the disposition for morally debatable inclinations, desires, and interests. So it did not mesh well with the military's morality and work ethic at the time, so that was considered as a drug addict and discharged. Very, very interesting though. Again, studying the history, what took place, how everything kind of transpired. So much we can take from this. Okay. And page 44, cannabis in America was more geared towards pleasure, no medicinable, they were claiming that there's no medicinable teas or folk remedies, just smoking to get high, or the ganja complex. And a gentleman named Bordelot notates intensification of individuality, and that's where a lot of cannabis smokers kind of align themselves with the reasons why they utilize it. It's pretty much yourself, but magnified. So, or in the words of this gentleman, intensification of individuality. And also what pushed it was the media exposure, and it sparked interest in youth. So one of the concerning issues with television and spreading of ideas, this is one of the downsides of it. Okay, so also the displeasure with segregation, materialism, and the Vietnam War made convenient rebellion. So by 1979, it was worldwide in countries. Young cannabis users, they were actually more likely to experiment with LSD and cocaine and heroin. So it definitely is a gateway drug, but not every person who uses it is going to use hard drugs. But it's, again, we're going through the history of what actually happened culturally, so we're seeing some of the issues that took place. Yes, but 1979 worldwide. Eric Hoffer, he observed in his quote on page 45, aspiring leaders cannot create mass movements unless conditions are historically ripe. So this one was the demographic birth rates increase after the war, the boost from TV and media, and one specific ad too was very helpful in this. Pretty much said, you only go around once in life, so you have to grab all the gusto you can. So more youth saw life as, they were once around consumers, so they were a lot more prone to the whole mindset of like, you only live once. I don't know if you guys remember the expression YOLO. So that was kind of thrust on them through the ad campaign. And more youth seen around, once around consumers lived and just enchanted with the world, and they were tired of the self-gratification, the superficiality, so they turned more to self-gratification and more prone to view cannabis as just another option. So cannabis has traveled to Micronesia, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and other Pacific Islanders by the Peace Corps and the youth of that era, despite the attempts to restrict it or keep it out. So on page 46, a very, very profound quote. It says, travel and transportation are crucial variables in drug history, just as they are in the history of infectious diseases. So things do travel, it's natural, but we got to see some of the negative downsides and ramifications of these choices. So let me go ahead and transition to segment 3 and see what we have for Coca and cocaine. Lots to learn, lots to discuss. There's so much that needs to be said about all of this. And again, this is just information, trying to get you more resources. So when you're making choices, this is a morality issue, a lot of spiritual questions, a lot of pros and cons. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the cons here in a moment as we discuss coca and cocaine. Very, very fascinating. So let me continue on to here. Sorry about that. Okay, so continue on to segment 3. Alright, coca and cocaine. So fact. The shortcoming of technology and transportation was literally what delayed the globalization of coca psychoactive alkaloid cocaine. So it's notated that approximately 3000 BC archaeological evidence of earliest use, Eastern Andes sampled leaves discovering their properties. And on page 46, I have another quote. It says, very interesting, from a person who used it, alcohol makes you feel good, but coca puts strength in your bones. 16th century, Spanish debated tolerance or suppression. So they tolerated, toleration prevailed due to actually the practicality of it. It actually sustained labor in the silver mines, so it was a good incentive. In 1860s, graduate student Albert Niemann described the isolation of cocaine in 1862. Merck pioneered morphine production, and Corsican pharmacist Angelo Mariani patented coca extract in Bordeaux wine. And there's an ad campaign that was geared towards the youth, the healthy, celebrities, and it became very popular, a worldwide drink or tonic. So, and that's where we get the imitation of this is original Coca-Cola that we're familiar with was derived from this drink. So the Bordeaux wine with the coca extract and expanded into other products. And it's notated that Ulysses Grant actually utilized this drink, this tonic, and it helped him write one of his memoirs before he passed away. Sigmund Freud, he wrote a paper in 1884 called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Über Coca, and gave it a great review and hinted at cocaine's possible use as a local anesthetic. And interestingly enough, later on that year, another gentleman, Carl Kohler, he actually received the recognition by showing and demonstrating that it was able to numb the pain, and he used it for a cornea removal in the eye. So very, very grateful. It became a godsend. They used it as a spinal block, therapeutic investment. The investment, and sparked demand. So, like I said, there's a lot of information. These are just notes I'm trying to share with you. So when you do pick it up, you can get a little bit of highlights, or you can kind of understanding what the tone or feel of the chapter is like. So much information. Park Davis, a leading American manufacturer, he dispatched a gentleman named Henry Rusby to go to Bolivia and to obtain a whole bunch of leaves. Unfortunately, he encountered a couple of problems, so they ended up extracting the alkaloid properties where they were at. The crude alkaloid in Andes as opposed to bringing the leaves. Coca grown from Nigeria to Ceylon, and the Dutch had a small scale in the 1800s until they developed a patent, or they secured a patent, and they had a little small business exclusive. So their little operation took off. It's pretty much everyone. Japan also had their hands in it as well in production. So, interestingly enough, though, the cheap cocaine-fed worldwide epidemic from 1890s to 1920s. The United States and India cases, though, they experienced a lot of poisoning, overdoses, and addictions by patients and doctors. So they just kind of saw it as another option. There's opium, there's ganja, there's alcohol, there's just another one right here. So, interestingly enough, though, this is where things get interesting. From sharp increase to cocaine abuse to restrictions, it was pushed in Canada and Europe after 1905 due to the big city, low life type of lifestyle. You've got the, they called them the Montreal pickpocketers and the Montmartre prostitutes. And the culture kind of brought up this crazy mindset. On page 51, there's a quote. They give all that they possess, even indispensable articles of clothing, in order to indulge in their mad cravings. 1920s world exports and epidemic decline, though, And David Musto, historian, he he really pushed hard for the first study of the epidemic of the heroin addiction. I'm sorry, not the heroin addiction, the cocaine epidemic. So he notated that he believes that the decline, it shows a generational learning pattern. So you have a new drug that has emerged. There's a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of people are using it, and then you come to the problems. And then after you see the problems, such as overdose, paranoia, and a lot of the users, it discouraged would-be users because they're seeing all this negative stuff about this controlled substance. So then the use declines just naturally. People are like, okay, this stuff is problem, so we're not going to use it anymore. The thing is, though, unfortunately, it is a harsh experience. Immunizes a generation. The catch is that when this generation passes, its immunity passes with it. So, 1970s baby boomers had no living memory of the downside. And that is the unfortunate downside, is that so many people, even today, haven't studied their history. They don't understand why people naturally were not using the drugs anymore. He noticed the pattern. So, the next question for the following section of the following episode is, the puzzle is why some drugs were popular and in certain places and other drugs weren't, and vice versa. That's going to be the discussion next week of how and why certain drugs took root in certain regions, such as the observation made by Mr. Moore, noticing that opium smoking and use was to help alleviate the current climate and locations that certain people were living in. And then also they mentioned that depending on the work, the laborers, that was the incentive or what sustained their labor, was to be utilizing their controlled substances to keep them working. So a lot needs to be said and a lot can be said. So let me go ahead and do a quick closing and we can kind of wrap up this segment. Again, a lot of information shared and probably did not do the best way of explaining it, but the information's out there. The book, highly recommend you get a copy of it if you need to. Full of information, but we're going to keep going through it. See what we can learn. Okay. Give me one moment here. Sorry for the delay. And we'll continue on here with this section. Okay, so to kind of wrap this up, I like to give a little bit of some hope, some solutions as we discuss the sad reality of overdose and addictions and how it affects families and communities, and also the different restrictions and ways that people try to suppress these things. So one of the things that I like to really argue is your brain needs to be fully mature. Like 25 is when a lot of experts say that the brain has reached its full maturity, and also developing liver, your body. It's these things, they do weigh, and there are negative, side effects to these things. It does harm the body. It messes with the mind. It alters the hormones. It could be a spiritual issue, morality issue, lots of concerns behind it. So first and foremost, though, age is a factor, health and nutrition is a factor, your morality, your spiritual belief, understanding, your conscience is a factor, work ethic. A lot of these drugs, the problem is people want to, like I said, self-pleasure, lots of different reasons, and also they talked about in Montreal in Canada the issues with pocket pickers. I can't think, sorry. I'm getting it by, we're getting by. Lots of issues, increased use of promiscuity, prostitution. We talked about cannabis being a gateway drug, so it seems like, and also it's been notated throughout the book so far, that when we advance in technology, the concentration of drugs gets stronger, and our tolerance gets stronger, and our desire for these things gets stronger. So it's at a certain point you have to ask yourself, like, what is the point in doing these things, and this isn't a you should or you shouldn't. This is, again, information, putting it out there, personal conviction, your conscience. Why are you doing what you're doing? A lot of these people, like I said, if you're unemployed, if you're alienated, if you're oppressed, these are reasons why the increase is there. Also, indentured slaves, slavery, when you're forced to do, working on these different fields, sugar plantations, etc., tobacco, people forced into it, and they end up using the controlled substance or the vice that they are cultivating. The rich, the elites, if you got a lot of money and you don't have anything else to do, you're going to do the drugs because you can. Also, they talked about the medical properties and reasons why people do it. So, again, a lot of information. I'm not really here to give you a definitive answer. I'm just giving you the facts and what took place and food for thought. I will reserve time to go into more detail about more opinion and personal convictions. But as of right now, it's just pretty much, again, information, your conscience between you and God, you and the government, you and your own self. So again, what were we going through again today? the little three. The big three was tobacco, sugar, and caffeine. So the little three today: opium, cannabis, coca. And I will repeat the intro again because I thought it was so fascinating. Tens of millions use them in crude form or in concentrated products such as heroin, hashish, and cocaine. These are what most people think of when they hear the words drugs. So, it is up to you to see, what you're going to allow in your life. Some people are very, very devout in their faith, and they abstain from alcohol, they abstain from caffeine, they abstain from added sugar, nicotine, all controlled substances. But then you've got some people who they'll get prescription medicine from the doctor, and because it's from the doctor, they're okay with that, but they won't do anything recreational. So it's really up to you. So I will leave that to you to decide. Again, I've been your host, that girl, Jenna. So I appreciate any person who's been able to follow along with me today. I've struggled with this one in particular. There was so much information that I don't even know if I did any service trying to pull out some important tidbits and information, but I appreciate anyone who's tuned in and listening. I've been your host, that girl, Jenna, and as always, thank you for tuning in. God's peace. Thank you.